Hello, everybody. How you doing out there? Once again, I report that I am doing well. I thought I'd wrap up Bulgaria now that I'm in Romania, and just speak to what I saw and how I felt about it. Keep in mind, I was only there for a month. I'm sure I only saw a fraction of what Bulgaria is about, but I'm going to give you my take nonetheless. So I'm going to start with the people. And I've said this to several others already, but this was the most beautiful group of people, looks-wise, that I've ever seen in a concentrated area. Both men and women. I don't know what DNA factors are involved here, but it was quite amazing. And frankly, there was also a height gene, so there were lots of tall people as well as good-looking people. So that struck me. In fact, in Sofia, I joked with a friend that I was the fattest person in the entire city, and that may not be true, but maybe third or fourth, which leads me to the point that they haven't completely discovered Western food yet. You see it at the malls, but I don't think it's their first choice. But the people as a whole were very fit. You don't see any child obesity, at least I didn't, so that's good. The flip side of that is that they love to smoke. I mean, they love to smoke. It shocked me when I went to a restaurant and the first thing that somebody asked me was smoking or non-smoking. And then the smoking section was 70% of the restaurant, with the rest of it being non-smoking. But that's where they're at. Something that caught me as odd too was, I don't know if you've ever seen those punching machines where you can, like, the ball drops down and you punch them and it gives you a reading as how hard you hit it. There are an awful lot of those around the city, and that had me wonder what they do at night, because I never saw anybody actually punching one. But I could speak to safety while I'm on the idea of punching. Like, I never felt safer in my life, honestly. Any feelings that I had about not being safe were completely in my head. And usually what would happen is, at a time where I was walking by myself in the dark somewhere and feeling like, maybe I should be concerned about this, a 12-year-old girl walking by herself on her cell phone would go by, and I would say, hey, maybe I'm not in trouble here. And as it turned out, I didn't see anything approaching violence or crime or anything other than maybe a little bit of speeding. But I'll tell you what, you put one toe on a crosswalk and traffic comes to a halt. I'll give them credit for that. And then lastly, I'll say this. It really came to me as I looked around that they are very family-oriented. I mean, it was quite touching, really. I mean, families were really together and really enjoyed each other's company, it seemed like. So that was a nice thing to see. I kind of felt like it was almost like late 70s America attitude that was now. So that was kind of interesting for me. Well, that brings me to the place itself. So, architecturally, it wasn't too interesting in the sense that a lot of the buildings were communist influenced, very square, probably efficient, but not much to look at. There were parts of town that were rebuilding, and you were starting to get some interest there. But the interest came in the fact that there were parks everywhere, and they worked around trees. So you had old growth trees in the middle of the city, and an awful lot of artwork and statues and other points of interest to look at. So from that standpoint, pretty cool. The other part of that is, of course, the ancient part of the cities I was in. They would start to dig for something new and find a dig spot, and they would just start digging it out, and rather than tearing it down or going over it, they would work around it. And they did that in many places. So kind of cool to see, 4th century architecture dug into the ground with a brand new building right next to it. You're probably sick of seeing cat pictures, but there's a reason for that. And both cats and dogs, but primarily cats, are everywhere. Now, I love my kitties, But you can imagine with that many cats, they're not taken care of from a standpoint of veterinary care. People are very kind to the animals. They're constantly feeding them, and the ones that are not feral will come up to you and rub on your leg and purr and do all those things. Of course, they're looking for a treat, but they're well fed, they're well cared for from that standpoint. Just, they're overrun. And I'd imagine that's something that the city's going to have to address sooner or later, I would think, because that could get out of control real quick. I did notice the dogs had tags on their ears, so they're doing something there, but not the cats. So people have asked me about my food picks, about is the food as good as it looks? And unfortunately, I'm going to have to say no. Were there a couple places that I found that I liked? Of course. But overall, I found that their taste here is probably very different from American taste. I think there's a reason that Americans are fat, because our corporations have figured out how to manipulate food in a way that makes it taste tremendous, and it makes us want more. Look, the quality of the food is excellent. There's no doubt about that. Everything's fresh. But their flavor profiles were a little muted most of the time. And, as it goes, it was fine. Filled the hole. I don't need to be eating more than I do anyway, so it was fine. But I wouldn't call it a culinary trip. So to wrap things up, I guess I'll say this. Will I go back to Bulgaria? Unlikely. Am I glad that I went to Bulgaria? Absolutely. The people were nice. The places were interesting. There was lots to see that I couldn't see in America. And yet it was very Ohio-esque in a lot of ways, particularly the countryside. Looked very much like Ohio, Pennsylvania. But nothing that you couldn't get elsewhere, and not any one thing that stood out that would make me go, wow, I need to go back and see more of that. I think my length of my visit was just right, and I hope you enjoyed seeing the pictures, and I look forward to you seeing more for the rest of my trip. And I hope you're doing well out there, and I'll see you soon.